Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our 6th Marketing Connected Live. I'm Emma Hegel, the Senior Events Manager at the Canadian Marketing Association. I hope everyone enjoyed Canada Day this week and is doing well. This pandemic has been a whirlwind, to say the very least, and today's session talks about how do you reach consumers and donors during a pandemic. Before we get started, I quickly wanted to mention that should you have any questions for the speakers for today's session, please use the Q&A feature to submit these. Questions will be addressed at the end of the session. Also, if you post on social media, please tag us with the hashtag #MarketingConnected. All right, this morning, CMA's President and CEO, John Wiltshire, will be chatting with Brady Hambleton from Canada's Children's Hospital Foundation and Kim Koster from Koster Strategy. Please join me in a virtual applause to welcome them.
Thank you, Emma, and welcome to everyone here today. We have some very illustrious guests with us here. We're very pleased to welcome onto the program Kim Koster and Brady Hambleton. Welcome, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Canada Day, everyone. It's been quite the week. Everyone's celebrating Canada Day a little bit different, but we still have that pride of being in such a fantastic country that is still learning and still growing as a nation. So I'm very happy to have you all here and looking forward to this discussion, in particularly because there's a number of firsts that are come along with this particular discussion on Marketing Connected Live. One is that we have more than one person being interviewed, so that's going to be interesting, a challenge. Second is that we have members from our councils involved, and not just members, chairs of our councils involved. And we're looking at the intersection of brand and not-for-profit today. So it's going to be, I think, a really interesting discussion in light of these shocks that we're, as a society, that we're under right now. So thanks to the two of you for coming on. We're looking forward to a good discussion. The first thing I wanted to do is just get a little bit of the background information out of the way. So starting with Kim, you are a branding expert. Did branding select you, or did you select branding? Can you give us a little bit of a background how you got into this particular part of the marketing profession?
Yeah, thanks, John. I started working in ad agencies really right out of university. I think probably because I thought it seemed interesting and fun and a little glamorous. And I tended to gravitate to clients that wanted a really strong business partnership with the agency and really had a strong belief in brands. And I ended up being a global leader on P&G account for about 10 years. Yeah, it's just what has appealed to me most in the advertising and marketing space.
Right, got into general and then went more specifically into brand. And you are the chair of our branding council. Is there a particular accomplishment that you're most proud of?
I would say we had the chance to work with the CMA leadership and with the board on creating some principles for agency RFPs. And the terrific thing is that those principles were put into the CMA Code of Ethics and Standards.
Right.
So that was a terrific contribution.
That's
and
a major.
A lot of issues in agency RFPs, and it's just a start, but it's good to have a start.
Yeah, and standards are very important in this profession. I think that was I was involved a little bit at that, and I think that was a really great work and great contribution by the brand council to the the profession of marketing in Canada. And on a personal note, like from a professional personal note, like what are you involved in these days?
Well, I've started recently working with Wood Green Community Services, which is the first time I'm actually working in a not-for-profit. And I'm promoting a program that helps newcomer professionals establish their careers in Canada. So it's kind of an exciting new chapter for me.
That's terrific. And now you get some street cred on this topic now, which is terrific. Yeah. Brady, talk about street cred. Brady Hambleton, you're a lifer for not-for-profits. I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, and you go way back in this category. Why is that? How did you come into the sector?
Well, like most professionals in not-for-profits, at least those that maybe entered the sector 5+ years ago, where we didn't have postgraduate programs dedicated to not-for-profit management like there are today, I sort of fell into it. Upon graduation, I was actually destined academically for a career in medicine or medical research, and I made the sort of the tough but I think I made the right decision to spend a career in dealing with people. That's really what I ultimately wanted to do. And I get so much satisfaction personally and professionally from working directly with people, either individuals or group of people. So upon graduation, I spent a little over a year doing some soul searching. Fell into a job at the University of Toronto, fairly junior job and in frontline donor services, and really haven't looked back from there. And have spent, John, as you said, now over 15 years in the not-for-profit sector with University Health Network, University of Toronto Heart and Stroke, and now where I am today with Canada's Children's Hospital Foundations.
Wonderful. And whether it's cause marketing or not-for-profit marketing, it's obviously very close to the human condition, and it's wonderful that that you're involved in that. Bring me in, Brady, just before we start into the topic. What's the typical conversation these days going on at the Not-for-Profit Council at the CMA, which you lead? What are you folks talking about?
Well, I would say over the past few months, starting in and around March, when COVID really started to take a toll on us, the primary subject of conversation really has been around how the not-for-profit sector at large is faring, whether it's through a marketing lens, through a programming lens, or just generally speaking, how members of the council are doing within each of their individual organizations. On the Not-for-Profit Council, we have a wide diversity of both not-for-profit, public sector, government, and fundraising organizations. So we have a wide breadth of representation, and in all cases, everyone's experience obviously is slightly different. So we dedicate a lot of time to talking about that and providing like an open forum for members of the Not-for-Profit Council. And then we typically have a number of standing agenda items around thought leadership, and increasingly thought leadership in collaboration with other councils, including the Brand Council.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Let's go back to the main event, so to speak, and that's really the intersection of best practices and brand with the not-for-profit sector. So setting this up a bit, prior to this COVID-19 hitting us, and by the way, even before that, the year that we're in, what wasn't looking like a great year. There's a lot of other societal events prior to that, but coming into this big shock where everyone had to stay home, what was considered best practice, prior to that for brands? What are some of the things that for donor marketing that you thought would say, if you had to list the top 3 or 4 things for best practices, what would they be?
I would say, John, is that question for me?
Either one of you.
Either one. Okay.
Like getting into the notion of evergreen, evergreen best practices for brand. Let's go to Kim on that.
Sure.
Like as it relates to donor marketing, what would you say would be the things that were evergreen all the time about donor marketing? Or Brady, you can jump back into it as well if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, speaking from the perspective of brand, being able to have a clear brand for an organization and a clear narrative, a story that you're putting forth has always been important and is still important. And I think, in some ways, brands struggle to articulate these days. They need to have a purpose and a mission and values.
Right.
And the great thing with not-for-profits is that they're already built to deliver on a purpose and mission and values. And so being able to articulate that as a brand and have a consistent narrative has always been important, and it's certainly important now too in terms of knowing how to react to change.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. That's great. And then Brady, from the perspective of someone that was actually leading a not-for-profit, if this kind of tsunami effect hit you, tell me what that was like.
Well, it's certainly, I can't speak for the other 85,000 not-for-profit organizations across Canada, but I would imagine we all went through a very similar exercise in and around the beginning to mid-March, when reality struck us that things are changing significantly, the way in which we, approach life at sort of a philosophical level, but within not-for-profit organizations, how we connect with donors, whether it's through events, whether it's through like some of the one-to-one appointments or meetings when you're working with more high net worth donors, or even virtually, had to adjust, and we had to make a very quick pivot. So for us, it came with significant reforecasting, obviously, of anticipated revenue and our underlying enterprise costs. And then from there, we actually looked very carefully at our messaging and the trajectory of our message from March through to the end of the year, and started placing some, I would say, calculated bets on where we thought we would be as a nation and as a country. And alongside that, where our partners, the nature of my organization that I work with is primarily corporate partnerships, right, and driven by philanthropic and strategic CSR related partnerships with major corporations. So, we took it upon ourselves to proactively go out to each and every one of those businesses and ask the question, how are you adjusting your messaging and your approach through both a brand lens and a partnership lens, and what can we do to help you make that adjustment? So making sure that we were able to make those pivots and be as agile as we possibly can without knee-jerking and saying, oh my goodness, this is doom and gloom. This year is going to be far from a normal year, so we just have to start making cuts left, right, and center. We actually made the decision to protect our people first. Yeah. And in doing so, had to make some tough decisions around other enterprise costs. And then we were hyper-focused on our partnerships and the messaging of those partnerships through the remainder of the year.
Wonderful. So it sounds like at your place of work, you managed to be fairly agile with your approach, and you're fairly nimble. But I can imagine that for these not-for-profits across the country, and I'm on the board of one of them, it's kind of like, whoa, how do we financially, how do we survive? And then how do we continue to deliver the services that we deliver now in this new environment, whether that be through physical distancing or whether that be moving things virtually? And so I think that has been it's been a sense of trauma to a degree to a lot of not-for-profits. Kim, as you're sitting back and watching from a brand perspective over this period of time, specific to not-for-profits, did you see anyone making some early mistakes? I don't know, you don't need to point them out, but like, what were some of those issues that you that you saw, that you say, well, you observed and said, that's interesting? I wonder.
Well, I heard a story of one smaller not-for-profit, kind of had that panic approach of, okay, divide up the donor list and among all the staff and call everybody. And so someone kind of said, well, wait a second, a huge proportion of our money comes from a few top donors. Right. And so it's back to that principle that applies to any kind of brand management of having target segments and targeting your approach. And so in a situation like this, and we've started to hear this pushback, we started off hearing, hey, we're all in this together. And it's like, well, actually everyone is not experiencing this in the same way. I saw an interesting factoid about, 10% of people claim that they're tipping less now, but 37% claim they're tipping more, higher tips. So it's polarized in a way. And so there's people who are actually feeling very fortunate that they still have jobs and feeling like more than ever a duty to pay that back and contribute. So the opportunity to identify those different targets and realize that everyone's not experiencing this the same way. Yeah. Missed opportunity for any brand, including within not-for-profits.
I think that's good. Brady, anything to add to that?
I think echoing everything Kim has said, what I saw early on, and it's quieted out a bit, but there were a number of organizations that really rushed to leverage COVID as a reason why they needed support now, like emergency. And in some cases, it made sense, depending on the organization, whether it was healthcare related or humanitarian kind of NGO, or the food banks, for instance, which are all, I mean, no cause is unworthy, but in the context of COVID and what toll COVID is taking on, say, hospitals, on food bank, and on some of the social services that people rely on, the message resonated. Whereas there were other types of organizations that used COVID and maybe didn't think through it as much as I could in terms of the authenticity of the message. And so I'm obviously don't know how those appeals, how those organizations fared out. But I would imagine if I was a donor that was a loyal supporter of something that may not be, primary to the front line or something, directly related to COVID, I might pause and say, I'm not sure that either this is the most appropriate time or that's the most appropriate temperature and tone of message. So I've seen less and less of that now. In fact, I think that the space has become extremely crowded in a very short period of time, with all kinds of incredible, efforts of corporations and individuals. And so now I think our job is to figure out how to navigate through the rest of the year and untangle, if you will, a bit of the web that's been cast on us by COVID.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think my favorite email I received early in the COVID time period was from a tea shop I happened to visit for half an hour when I was in England last November. And they were there for me during this period of time to help me through it. And I thought, well, send me some tea bags. And I'm not sure what they're going to do for me, but it's kind of that broad brush approach. I think maybe was a bit of a reaction, knee-jerk reaction. What about the profile of a donor in this time? What have you heard? What's the notion? Like, has that changed, or is it the same donors, or should you be, as Kim's saying, doing some segmentation on people with or without jobs, if you can figure that out? Any best practices emerging on segmentation?
Segmentation, I think, has always been and will always be important, whether we're in kind of the midst of a pandemic or not. I think something that Kim said I'll pick up on, and that is that while many people have been fortunate to keep their jobs, I think it's a reflection of their employers, sort of if you take sort of the big picture lens, and being able to potentially identify which employers have stayed open, or which businesses or corporations have stayed open, and take perhaps an employee giving approach. And if you have an existing partnership with any one of those businesses, having the conversation with that partner around whether they would be open to some sort of matching incentive for their employees, or engaging their employees at large in employee giving if they aren't already thinking about that. And then I think with respect to individual segmentation, it's tricky to figure out who's employed, who's unemployed. But if you're able to do that, or if you're able to get a sense or some sort of demographic profile of who's most likely to be gainfully employed, versus what are those segments that haven't been so fortunate through the pandemic, then targeting your communications to them, I think, is important. And I think just broadly speaking, and certainly an approach that we subscribe to at my organization, is just always being mindful of where somebody may be at, and sort of conditioning a lot of your copy with, we know that these are tough times, and we appreciate every ounce of support, big or small. So I've fundraising organizations and not-for-profits are sometimes afraid to go there and to use that, because they feel it may give a potential supporter an out. But we believe 100% that adjusting the tone of your messaging and ensuring that you're being sensitive and mindful to the times is critically important. And that may not help you in the short term as much as you'd like it to, but it's certainly going to maintain and build a lot more loyalty, trust, and credibility with your supporter base in the long run. And everyone will recover. These things, have their ups and downs. It may be a multi-year recovery, but we'll recover. So think about it in terms of the long game, and invest in the long game with your donors and your supporters as well.
Yeah, that's great. I like both points. One is that go to where the money is, and employers, that makes some sense. It's easy segmentation, easy place to do that, and particularly if you can align your brand attributes with some of the employers and what they're trying to get done, and the underlying demographics of the employees at that place, where the cause is, for sure. Is there anything else? I mean, I know, Kim, and you and I were talking at one point about the whole notion of thrift, and in terms of how you're positioning yourself, are potential donors in your mind, from a one of the attributes that you're going to use always is, are you going to have wise use of my funding? Is it a little more pronounced in these times?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when you look at what's happening to the changes in people's values, that I saw it described as well in a study as being, importance of thrift, or not wasting money, and prioritization of needs versus wants. And yeah, there's always been an eye by donors on, is this organization putting most of the money towards the people who need it, and it's not getting sucked up in bureaucracy or other costs. More than ever, as people are holding themselves to the standard of focusing on needs versus wants and being efficient with their money, then I think it's a good story for not-for-profits to say, hey, here's how we've responded. Here's how we're cutting costs. Here's how we're making priority decisions to reflect what's happening.
Great. Yeah, and I know that one charity that I give to from time to time, came right out with it saying, we need to replace the rug on one of our, one of our new buildings that we put up, and we need 30,000 square feet or whatever of carpeting. Who can help? And I mean, it really gives you a sense that they're actually looking at each of the decisions they're making and trying to make one that in these times makes sense and is really mission critical to their brand and what they want to do. So that's interesting. Okay, but you guys did write a blog, and I've already spent 2/3 of the time talking about other things. So let's go into the blog, and I guess people would have either read this blog in advance or not. So I just go through some of the things that you said and get you to comment about, in particular, if there's something to say about it in the period of these crises, because it's not just COVID. We've got Black Lives Matter, this whole reawakening of society to some of the systemic racism that occurs as well. And so it feels like these are dark, different times for sure. But you've given 7 pieces of advice in your blog. The first one is, plan to change your plans. I guess that's about being agile.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, so that's pretty straightforward. Plan to change your plans because the world is changing. And no one has a crystal ball out there. I say the art of prognostication is truly an art. Every morning I get up, I say, for sure the stock market's going to go down. And it doesn't. It goes up, and I say, well, I guess I don't really understand the world. But being a little bit more agile in our approach. Second one is lift people up. Can you give me an example of what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the tone, understandably, of brands' communication right in the beginning was pretty somber,
Right.
And then you started to see, I think Tangerine was one of the early brands that came out with something that showed, hey, here's the things we're looking forward to. And, it was one of their best testing pieces of creative, because people were just ready to say, yes, I want to feel hopeful. I want to be uplifted. And, also you saw Budweiser with their kind of reboot of WhatsApp, or there was a No Frills little video about, shopping cart sanitation and etiquette. And so we saw that people, humor was great too. And people want to feel uplifted and hopeful, and brands can help them feel that way. And it also is a way of drawing people towards your message, because that's what people are attracted to.
Great, yeah. I'm going to go down to one about being authentic, because I think it's kind of interesting and it lines up with an earlier conversation. What do you mean it's from a brand perspective to be authentic as it relates to not-for-profit?
Well,
you're the thing that you guys did.
I think so. Yeah, we incorporated a small case study of something we did working with one of our major corporate partners, who fortunately stayed open through the crisis, and has continued to stay open and is really deeply committed to our cause, children's health, and the work that we do. But they actually came to us and they said, we don't necessarily think that the way that we typically approach our fundraising and our awareness in a normal year is the most appropriate, nor is it the most authentic. It's a bit tone deaf, because it's all about give.
Right.
And we said, okay, so let's take a step back and let's look at your brand. Let's look at our cause. Let's explore the intersection between the two. and let's create sort of a messaging, a layer of awareness, typical marketing layer of awareness, followed by, you know, something that's a little bit more concrete around the importance of giving and why we're out there asking for money to support children's health during COVID, and create, you know, a narrative that is authentic, that, you know, upholds your brand and your brand values, and upholds our cause and the importance of our cause, and does so in a way that is, you know, genuine, that acknowledges, you know, the circumstances that we're all in, and that still impresses upon people that if you're able to, this is a cause that is worthy of support. It's important. Children are still going to continue to get sick. Children are still going to need to get care. But we didn't sort of go at it through the lens of, it's all about the kids and we just need you to give, give, give. We actually took the time to consider our partner's brand as well, and how we could put the two messages together and really nail that intersection in the most authentic way. Because people now more than ever, to Kim's point, they need hope. They need stories. They need to feel good, but they can also, you know, really detect if something is not authentic and
Yes.
is just being said for the sake of being said.
Yeah, I think that's tremendous. A couple of questions came in, and some of the other advice people can read from the blog. The one I just mentioned, the one that I thought was really smart was, you know, if you're a not-for-profit brand right now and you advertise more right now, you're going to get because other people are hiding maybe, or you know, biding their time, call it, you're going to get a nice share of voice bump. So I think that's really, you know, great advice. We did get a couple of questions coming in, and I wanted to spend the last 2 or 3 minutes asking about them. One is really for Kim, I think, and it relates to, you know, almost experientially, as brands go through this period of time, does it change them? Should they consider tweaking their essence in some way? I mean, I know branding is more fundamental and radical, like it's about your essence, but are we all we're changing in society? I'm changing. Our brand's changing. Should they reflect that on a contemporary basis?
Yeah, I mean, we're asking if we've created a brand and mission and values and all those good things, we're really asking for a lot of brands to stretch those things much further than they've ever been stretched before to accommodate this big social change. And I think it can show you, if you say, wow, that what we've created to articulate this brand, we can't stretch it to encompass this. And so what do we need to do to evolve to make it big enough to contain what it needs to? What have we not articulated that needs to be articulated to reflect what's going on now? Or in what ways are we not living what we said our brand is about, now that there's more ways to show how you live what your brand is about? So yeah, I think it's a chance to revisit and say, you know, is it holding up to this pressure, and do we need to evolve and stretch it further?
That's amazing answer. I think that's tremendous. It's not that your brand in essence changes, but it's going to be it's showing in a different light, and you're going to showing up if you're again going back to that notion of being authentic. The other question was, I think, a hard one to answer, but I'll throw it out there and see if there's any thoughts. Is, you know, this second so-called quote unquote second wave that we may or may not see or whatever. You know, is that kind of, how does that reflect on not-for-profits? Are they worried about that? Is there something to do to prepare for that or to react to that if it does occur? Any thoughts on that, other than continuing to be plan to change your plans? And is that it?
It's a tough one. It's a tough one because nobody has a crystal ball, and nobody knows if or when this second wave will come. I think it's inevitable during, you know, our flu season that typically starts around the end of August, early September. But to what extent is that going to play out the way the first wave did, and to what extent are we going to regress back into, you know, basically a complete lockdown, depending on, you know, the province you're in or as a nation. So my advice would be stay the course. Prepare yourself and start thinking about now, like, okay, so if you in your organization were thrust back into a second wave and basically back into the circumstances that we were living through early March through to arguably mid-June. We've just sort of started to come out now and see businesses returning back to normal. Think about your own messaging and that sort of that what is the underlying tone that you want to set, and what is it that you would want to say to your base of supporters or your base of advocates if you're not, you know, strictly a fundraising organization, and start to think about that and commit yourself and your organization to being authentic, to being deliberate, and to your point, John, like prepare to, you know, adjust your plan on the turn of a dime, which isn't something that a lot of not-for-profits are necessarily good at or strong at. There's a tendency to lock it in and leave it alone. And this is not the year to lock it in and leave it alone. You have to be prepared to shift your communications and all of the underlying strategies on the turn of a dime.
And, you know, second wave might not even be a COVID second wave. There could be another wave of another kind of social change.
Absolutely. There's so much. Yeah.
Yeah. I said to someone the other day that I think the next thing is going to happen, we're going to have giant leeches falling from the sky. But it's what a great conversation. Thanks so much for both of you. It's authentic and well-timed and really great advice. We've run out of time, and I know that there's a number of questions that we didn't get to. Lively audience today, so thanks for those questions. Again, terrific. And I'm going to turn it back to Emma to close off today's program.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kim, Brady, and John, for that great discussion. And thank you, everyone, for your questions and for tuning in today. A recording of this will be sent out in email, as well as details for our next Marketing Connected Live, which will be taking place on July 21st with Brent Chatters from Accenture. He will be talking about 5 truths and the deep implications they have across your business, which will also be a great conversation. If you missed any of our previous Marketing Connected Live webinars, there will be a link to access these on our website as well, included in that post-event email. I quickly wanted to mention that Tuesday next week on July 7th, we have our CMA MarTech, where there will be 3 20-minute thought leadership sessions, followed by a moderated panel discussion hosted by the CMA MarTech Council. Thank you so much for joining today, and have a great day.